Imagine standing between two pillars, blind, broken, alone. The strongest man in the Bible can no longer see the light. His enemies laugh. His strength is gone. His future appears finished. But the greatest tragedy in Samson's life wasn't losing his strength. It was forgetting where his strength came from. How does a man chosen by God before birth become a prisoner? The answer isn't found in his muscles. It's found in the psychology of the human heart. Every great story begins with a problem. Samson's story began with a nation that had forgotten God. Israel had once again turned away from the Lord. For 40 long years the Philistines ruled over them. Fear became normal. Oppression became ordinary. Hope slowly disappeared. But while an entire nation believed nothing would ever change, God was already preparing an answer. In a quiet village called Zorah lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They carried a different kind of pain. They had no child. In their culture, years of unanswered prayers often felt like years of unanswered questions. Yet heaven had not forgotten them. One ordinary day, the messenger of the Lord appeared to Manoah's wife with words that would change history.
Even though you have been barren, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall touch his head.
He instructed that the child would be dedicated to God from birth as a Nazarite.
We must be careful to do all that the angel commanded. How shall we train the child who will be born?
The Lord will guide us.
His uncut hair would not be the source of his strength. It would be a visible reminder that his life belonged to God. Before Samson ever lifted a jawbone, before he defeated a lion, before he made the choices that would define his life, God had already called him. And perhaps that's the first lesson of Samson's story. Purpose doesn't begin when we discover it. Sometimes, God begins writing our story long before we ever understand it. Samson was born exactly as God had promised. His parents didn't simply celebrate the birth of a son. They embraced the responsibility of raising a child who belonged to God, day after day, year after year. Samson grew. His hair remained uncut, a quiet reminder that his life had been set apart long before he understood why. Purpose doesn't eliminate ordinary life. It grows within it. The field still needed tending. Meals still had to be prepared. Seasons came and went. Yet beneath the ordinary rhythms of life, God was shaping something extraordinary. Then, Scripture says something remarkable. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him. It doesn't describe great victories. It doesn't mention impossible strength. Only a stirring. That's often how God's work begins. Before the world sees outward change, God is already transforming the heart. Every calling begins quietly, long before anyone else notices it. Samson had grown under God's calling, but every calling eventually encounters a choice. One day, Samson traveled to Timnah, a Philistine city. There, he saw a young Philistine woman. The moment was ordinary. Yet the decision that followed would shape the rest of his life. Samson returned home and said to his parents, "I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife." His parents were troubled. "Is there no woman among your own people?" they asked. It was a reasonable question. God had called Samson to deliver Israel from the Philistines, not to become closely tied to them. But desire has a way of convincing us that what feels right must be right.
I know what must
Samson
be done.
answered, "Get her for me.
This burden
She is
is
right
mine alone
in
to
my
carry.
eyes." Those words reveal
I will
more than
not falter.
preference. They reveal a heart beginning to trust its own judgment above wise counsel. Scripture tells us that God would still use this decision to begin confronting the Philistines. Yet that doesn't remove Samson's responsibility. Sometimes God can redeem our choices, but that never means every choice is wise. Every important decision begins a journey. As Samson traveled toward Timnah once again, the road led through vineyards. Then, without warning, a young lion came roaring toward him. Scripture tells us the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson. He tore the lion apart with his bare hands, not because of extraordinary muscles, but because God's strength rested upon him. Samson told no one what had happened. Days later, he returned along the same road. Inside the lion's carcass, a swarm of bees had made honey. Samson reached inside. He ate the honey. Then he shared it with his parents, without telling them where it came from. The lion wasn't Samson's greatest victory. The greater danger came afterward. Success can quietly convince us that we no longer need the wisdom that brought us there. Samson arrived in Timnah for the wedding feast. For 7 days, the celebration brought together Israelites and Philistines. Confident after his victory over the lion, Samson presented a challenge. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. No one could solve the riddle. But instead of accepting defeat, the Philistine companions threatened Samson's bride. They demanded that she discover the answer. Fear became stronger than loyalty. Day after day, she pleaded with Samson. At first, he refused. Eventually, he gave in. Before the feast ended, the answer spread through the crowd. The companions smiled. Samson immediately understood what had happened. "If you had not plowed with my heifer," he said, "you would not have solved my riddle." His anger burned, yet beneath the anger, pride had quietly created the situation itself. Sometimes the greatest enemy isn't being betrayed, it's believing we are too wise to ever be deceived.